At 6 a.m. on Saturday morning, Karen stood in her front yard holding a sign that read, Stop na HBO Heodi Destruction, while a local news crew set up their equipment. She called Channel 7's Consumer Protection segment, claiming that rogue homeowners were destroying property values through illegal construction projects. I'm here to speak for the silent majority of homeowners who believe in community standards, Karen declared to the camera, her voice pitched perfectly for sympathetic coverage. When one person decides rules don't apply to them, everyone suffers. The reporter, a young woman named Jessica, nodded sympathetically while the cameraman focused on Derek's postal annex. And you say this structure was built without proper community approval? Absolutely. Despite clear HOA guidelines prohibiting commercial structures in residential areas, Mr. Chen proceeded with this. This eyesore that's destroying our neighborhood's character. What Karen didn't notice was Derek approaching from behind, carrying a folder of documents and wearing a grim expression that suggested her media ambush was about to backfire spectacularly. Excuse me, Derek interrupted politely. I couldn't help but overhear. I'm Derek Chen, the homeowner in question. The reporter immediately turned the microphone toward him. Mr. Chen, how do you respond to these allegations? Derek's response was measured and devastating. He produced his building permits, the city's letter of approval, and most damaging of all, a 3-month log of Karen's systematic blocking of his mailbox, complete with photographs and timestamps. I built this postal annex because Mrs. Whitmore has been deliberately interfering with my mail delivery for months, Derek explained calmly. When someone weaponizes the postal system to harass their neighbors, sometimes you have to find creative solutions. The reporter's eyes lit up with the scent of a better story. Mrs. Whitmore, is it true that you've been blocking Mr. Chen's mailbox? Karen's carefully constructed narrative collapsed in real time. That's not. It was just parking. Every Tuesday for 3 months? Derek pressed gently. Always positioning your car so the mail carrier couldn't reach the box? The camera captured every moment of Karen's meltdown. Her face cycled through a rainbow of emotions. Denial, anger, panic, and finally, a kind of broken resignation. I was trying to maintain standards, she whispered, her voice barely audible. The news segment aired that evening with the headline, How a President's Mail Harassment Backfires. Within hours, Karen's phone was ringing nonstop with calls from neighbors, fellow HOA presidents, and worst of all, the regional HOA management company that oversaw their neighborhood association. By Sunday morning, Karen had resigned from the HOA board. By Monday, she'd received a formal letter from the Postal Service regarding mail interference. By Tuesday, the same day she used to block Derek's mailbox, she was sitting in her living room, surrounded by the wreckage of her reputation, watching Derek check his mail at his cheerful little postal annex. Tom found her there that evening, staring out the window with a cup of cold coffee in her hands. Maybe it's time to let it go, he suggested gently. Karen turned to look at her husband, and for the first time in months, her expression was something other than rage or determination. It was thoughtful. He was just trying to get his mail, she said quietly. Yeah, Karen, he was. She sat in silence for a long moment, then stood up and walked to her desk. She pulled out a piece of stationery and began to write. Across the street, Derek was surprised to find a handwritten note in his new mailbox the next morning. It was brief, written in Karen's precise script. I'm sorry. Your postal annex is actually quite charming. Key. But as Derek smiled and folded the note, he didn't notice Karen watching from her window, her expression unreadable. The apology was real, but something in her eyes suggested that while this battle was over, Karen Whitmore's war with the concept of being wrong was far from finished. The postal annex stood as a monument to the power of creative problem-solving, but in Karen's mind, it was becoming something else entirely, a daily reminder that sometimes the best defense against chaos isn't control, but surrender. The question was, would Karen learn that lesson, or would she find new ways to impose her vision of order on a world determined to remain beautifully, frustratingly unpredictable? Karen Whitmore stood frozen in her driveway, watching in horror as a massive wooden structure materialized across the street. The construction crew had been working since dawn, and now, at precisely 11:47 a.m., her worst nightmare was taking shape. A miniature post office, complete with a red mailbox, a tiny bell tower, and a hand-painted sign reading Maple Street Postal Annex. "This is a residential neighborhood," Karen shrieked, her voice carrying across the street like a battle cry. The homeowner, Derek Chen, emerged from behind the structure with a clipboard and a satisfied grin. "Morning, Karen. Just exercising my property rights. According to City Ordinance 47B, I'm allowed to install a private mailbox facility on my own land." Karen's perfectly manicured fingers clenched around her HOA violation book. For 3 months, she'd been strategically parking her silver Lexus in front of Derek's mailbox every Tuesday, garbage day, forcing him to miss important deliveries. It was a small but effective way to remind him that his lawn was exactly 2 inches too tall and his garden gnomes violated the neighborhood's tasteful outdoor decor clause. "You can't just build a postal facility." Karen sputtered, her carefully applied makeup beginning to streak with perspiration. "Actually, I can." Derek's smile widened as he gestured to the building permits taped to the structure's door. All legal and approved. The city was very interested to hear about the ongoing mail interference issues in our neighborhood. The blood drained from Karen's face. She'd been so careful, so strategic. Tuesdays only, just long enough to cause inconvenience without seeming intentional. But somehow, Derek had outmaneuvered her. "This is war," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage and humiliation. Derek chuckled. "No, Karen. This is problem solving." As Karen stormed back to her house, her mind raced through possibilities. The HOA handbook was practically memorized, but this situation wasn't covered. Private postal facilities weren't explicitly forbidden, but surely there had to be something. Noise ordinance, structural requirements, aesthetic guidelines. She burst through her front door, nearly knocking over her husband Tom, who was reading the morning paper in his recliner. "Tom, emergency HOA meeting. Tonight, 7 o'clock sharp." Tom barely looked up from his sports section. "What's the crisis this time?" "Derek Chen has declared war on our entire neighborhood's property values," Karen announced dramatically, "and I'm going to destroy him." Outside, the sound of hammering continued as Derek's postal annex neared completion. Karen watched from her window, her reflection in the glass, showing a woman whose perfectly controlled world was beginning to crack. She'd spent 5 years as HOA president, maintaining order, preserving standards, and keeping chaos at bay. But Derek's little rebellion had awakened something dangerous in Karen, a determination that would either restore her authority or consume everything she'd worked to build. The war for Maple Street had officially begun. The emergency HOA meeting convened in Karen's living room at exactly 7:00 p.m. Though only 3 of the 7 board members showed up, Karen paced before her assembled neighbors like a general addressing troops, her presentation slides projected onto her wall with military precision. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are facing an unprecedented threat to our community standards," Karen announced, clicking to a photo of Derek's postal annex. "This structure represents a complete breakdown of neighborhood integrity." Mrs. Patterson, the 78-year-old treasurer, squinted at the image. "It looks rather charming, actually. Reminds me of the little post office in Stars Hollow." Karen's eye twitched. "Charming is not the point, Mrs. Patterson. The point is precedent. If we allow Derek to build whatever he wants, what's next? Convenience stores, auto repair shops, food trucks. I wouldn't mind a food truck," mumbled Dave from 2 houses down. "This is exactly the attitude that destroys property values." Karen slammed her pointer against the wall. "We have rules for a reason." The meeting devolved quickly. By 8:30, Karen found herself alone in her living room, surrounded by empty coffee cups and the bitter taste of defeat. Even her own board members didn't understand the gravity of the situation. But Karen Whitmore didn't become HOA president by accepting defeat. The next morning, she launched phase 2 of her campaign. Armed with a measuring tape and a digital camera, She began documenting every possible violation of Derek's postal annex. The structure was exactly 7.3 feet tall, potentially exceeding the neighborhood's 7-foot maximum for auxiliary structures. The paint was colonial red rather than the approved barn red from the community color palette. Most promising of all, the building was positioned 3.2 feet from the property line, potentially violating the 4-foot setback requirement. "But you," Karen whispered, photographing the measurements with scientific precision. She spent the afternoon crafting violation notices, each one a masterpiece of bureaucratic intimidation. By 4 p.m., Derek's front door was decorated with enough citations to wallpaper a small room. Derek's response came that evening in the form of a knock on Karen's door. She opened it to find him holding a manila folder and wearing the same satisfied smile that had haunted her dreams. "Karen, I wanted to thank you for the thorough inspection," he said pleasantly. "It prompted me to double-check my permits." He handed her the folder. Inside were copies of his building permits, along with a letter from the city planning department. Karen's hands shook as she read the official documentation. Derek's postal annex was not only completely legal, but had been fast-tracked as part of the city's Innovative Community Solutions initiative. The city planner mentioned they're considering using my design as a model for other neighborhoods with mail delivery issues, Derek continued. Apparently, HOA interference with postal services is becoming a real problem. Karen's face went white, then red, then purple. "This isn't over," she managed to choke out. "I know," Derek replied gently, "but it should be." As Derek walked away, Karen stood in her doorway, watching her perfectly ordered world crumble. The postal annex sat across the street like a monument to her failure, its cheerful red paint gleaming in the evening light. But Karen wasn't finished, not by a long shot. She had one more card to play.